A CEO walked into a small cafe, not knowing the barista knew his mother's favorite tea. What started as a rainy evening escape became the moment that would change both their lives. But before we dive deep into this story, where in the world are you watching from right now? Tell us in the comment below. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if heartfelt, soul-touching tales are your kind of thing, make sure to subscribe to Heartfelt Tales TV so you never miss the next story that might just stay with you forever. It was the kind of rain that didn't just fall, it lingered, hung heavy in the air as though it had a purpose, as if it wanted to scrub the whole city clean, rinsing away every sharp edge and every hurried footstep. On the corner of Maple and Pine, tucked between a bookshop that rarely had customers and an antique store that never seemed to change its window display, sat a small old-fashioned cafe. Its windows glowed softly against the gray evening, casting warm light onto the slick cobblestones outside. Every few seconds, the golden haze would shimmer in the puddles. Whenever a car passed by, inside, the air was scented with cinnamon and nutmeg, and somewhere in the corner, a record player spun a slow tune, the kind of melody that felt like it belonged to another time. And into that light, pushing the heavy glass door open, stepped a man who didn't look like he belonged there at all. Ethan Blake, to the world. He was a figure seen in magazine profiles, in business articles written about mergers and numbers, a man whose signature could move millions. Tonight, though, he wasn't the image those pages showed. The rain had darkened the shoulders of his tailored suit, and droplets clung stubbornly to his hair. His black leather shoes shone under the light, not because they were polished, but because they were wet. He was the kind of man who lived on a strict clock, whose life was divided into minutes, each one accounted for, each one used to chase the next deadline. His phone was never out of reach, his calendar never empty, and yet, standing in the doorway of this quiet little cafe, there was a hesitation in him. The warmth inside brushed against him first, a soft, invisible welcome, the faint clink of ceramic cups, the low murmur of a couple by the far wall, the scratchy whisper of the record's needle. It was the sort of place that asked you to slow down, whether you wanted to or not. For a second, he thought about turning back. Places like this weren't his world. They belonged to students bent over notebooks, to neighbors exchanging gossip, to people who had the luxury of sitting still. But the rain outside was relentless, its steady drumbeat on the awning daring him to leave. Something in him, something quiet but stubborn, made him take a step forward instead. A soft chime from a bell above the door announced his presence. Behind the counter, a young woman looked up, Clara Bennett. Her dark hair was tied back loosely, a few strands falling over her cheek. She had been drying a mug with a striped cloth, but when she saw him, her hand slowed, and for just a moment, her eyes lingered on his face. Not the way strangers usually looked at Ethan, with recognition, curiosity, or calculation, but with a kind of quiet noticing. She saw more than the expensive suit and the measured stance. She saw the exhaustion at the edges of his expression, the weight in his posture, the faint, faraway look in his eyes, as though he'd been somewhere else entirely until this moment. And without asking who he was or why he'd come in, Clara decided exactly what he needed. Clara didn't bother asking Ethan what he wanted. Some customers carried their answers in their posture, in the way their shoulders sat, in how quickly their eyes darted to the menu. But he wasn't looking at the board behind her. He was looking nowhere in particular. The kind of look people wore when they weren't sure if they'd come in for coffee or for something less obvious. She turned, reached for a tin kept high on the shelf, and opened it with a soft metallic click. A warm, earthy fragrance drifted out. Cinnamon bark, crushed cardamom pods, and something citrusy. Her grandmother's recipe. It wasn't on the menu, but Clara made it for people who looked like they needed it. She called it spiced tea, but really, it was comfort in a cup. Ethan noticed the way her hands moved. Not rushed, not robotic, but careful, measuring without measuring. She poured steaming water into a small glass teapot, letting the spices bloom and swirl. turning the water a deep amber. The air between them began to change. The rain was still tapping the windows, but in here, there was a small pocket of warmth. He didn't speak until she set the cup in front of him. No logo, no sleek branding, just a white porcelain mug with a small chip near the handle. "What's this?" he asked, his voice low, as though unsure if conversation belonged here. "Something you look like you need," Clara replied. Her tone was light, but her eyes didn't leave his until he picked up the mug. The first sip was a surprise. He expected the bitterness of coffee, the quick jolt he usually relied on to push him through the next hour. Instead, he got warmth, not the kind that sits on your tongue and fades, but the kind that seems to travel slowly, settling deep in your chest. He let out a quiet breath he hadn't realized he was holding, and for the first time that day, he wasn't thinking about the call he'd missed or the emails waiting for him, just a soft burn of spice, the faint hum of the record player, and the steady rhythm of rain against glass. Clara didn't hover. She went back to polishing the counter, occasionally glancing his way, not to check if he was impressed, but to make sure the warmth had reached him. Ethan sat longer than he planned to. When he finally stood, he left a folded bill under the mug and a faint ring of tea at the bottom of the cup. He didn't say goodbye, but something in his expression told Clara she'd see him again. Ethan came back the very next day, not because he needed tea. He told himself he didn't even like tea, not because it was convenient. The cafe was actually out of his way, tucked between an antique bookstore and a shop that sold nothing but clocks. No, he came back because he wanted to see her. It was raining again, though lighter this time, the kind of rain that made streets shine like mirrors. When he stepped inside, Clara looked up from the register. No words passed between them, but her lips curved into that same small smile, the kind that didn't demand a return, but always seemed to earn one anyway. She didn't ask for his order. He didn't give one. Within minutes, the familiar fragrance of cinnamon and cardamom was weaving through the air. She set the cup down in front of him, like she had the night before. And again, she didn't charge him. "This is starting to feel suspicious," he said quietly, half teasing, half curious. "Not everything comes with a price tag," she replied, and went back to refilling the sugar jar. It became a rhythm neither of them spoke about. One day turned into three. Three turned into a week. Each time, he arrived at roughly the same hour, always in his tailored suit, always with a briefcase still in his hand, as if he'd walked straight from some high-rise meeting into this quiet little world of chipped mugs and rain-lit windows. Some evenings they talked about the weather, about the strange titles in the bookstore next door, about how the clocks in the shop down the street all seemed to chime at different times. Other evenings, they didn't speak at all, and somehow those silences felt like conversations too. Clara began to notice small things about him, how his shoulders loosened the longer he sat, how he would glance at the door when it opened, as if bracing for someone who never came. And Ethan, he noticed her laugh, not the polite laugh she gave to other customers, but the unguarded one, that escape when something genuinely amused her. It was rare, and he began to look for it, like a prize worth earning. By the second week, she had a slice of cinnamon cake waiting for him, already plated before he arrived. He never asked for it. He never refused it. And though he didn't say it out loud, he started to crave the way it paired with the tea and with her company. Ethan didn't realize it yet, but each visit was pulling him a little further from the life he thought he couldn't slow down from, and closer to a place where timing seemed so sharp. It had been 12 days straight, 12 days of rain-slick streets, steaming cups of spiced tea, and the kind of quiet company Ethan didn't know he'd been starving for. That night, the rain came harder, a heavy, steady drumming against his car roof as he pulled up to the familiar corner. The warm yellow glow of the cafe's windows was usually there to greet him, softening the gray world outside. But tonight, there was only darkness. He frowned, checked his watch. It wasn't even 7. She always kept the place open until 9. The wooden, open sign that normally swung in the breeze was gone, its absence somehow louder than any knock could be. He got out of the car, his shoes splashing in shallow puddles, and stepped up to the door. A small, handwritten note was taped to the glass. The ink had bled in the rain, but he could still make out the words. Closed early today. Sorry. No explanation. No warm light spilling out from behind her counter. Just silence. Ethan stood there longer than he meant to, the rain soaking into the cuffs of his suit jacket. It was strange how quickly absence could feel so heavy. On the drive home, he kept replaying her face in his mind, searching for any sign that something had been wrong. But she had been smiling yesterday, laughing even. He remembered it clearly. She'd laughed at the way he'd tried to guess her cinnamon cake recipe. The next day, the cafe was open again. But when he stepped inside, he noticed things he hadn't before. The way the paint on the walls was peeling in spots. How two of the ceiling lights flickered faintly. How the espresso machine gave a tired wheeze with every use. Clara greeted him warmly, but her smile seemed a fraction dimmer. Not gone, just guarded. He didn't ask why she closed early, and she didn't offer an answer. But he knew, not in detail, not in numbers, but in that unspoken way you know. When something you love is slipping away from someone who's trying desperately to hold on. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt an ache in his chest that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with a person. If you're feeling this story so far, and you don't want to miss what happens when kindness and fate collide, stay with us, because the next part will change everything. Ethan didn't sleep much that night. The image of Clara standing behind her counter, smiling, serving, pretending everything was fine, kept circling back, like a song stuck in his head that wouldn't fade no matter how many times he tried to drown it out. He knew that look. He'd seen it in the eyes of employees right before they handed in their resignation. He'd seen it in his own reflection, back when he was younger and still trying to save something that couldn't be saved. But Clara's Café, it was different. This wasn't just brick and mortar. It was warmth. It was cinnamon in the air and the faint hum of an old jazz record in the background. It was the kind of place you didn't just walk into. You arrived at it like it was always waiting for you. And Ethan, he wasn't ready to let it disappear. The next morning, he made a phone call, not to his assistant, not to his driver, but directly to someone who could untangle financial messes with the precision of a surgeon. It turned out Clara's troubles weren't a mystery. A leaky roof, repairs she couldn't afford, a slow season after a string of bad weather, debt that had quietly stacked up, one bill at a time, until it became a wall she couldn't climb. Ethan didn't hesitate. He paid every last cent, not from the company's account, not as some corporate investment, but from his own pocket, quietly, without ceremony, without a single word to her. He even told the lawyer handling the payment, "She can't know it was me," because this wasn't about gratitude. It wasn't about the thanks. It was about that first night when she'd seen a man soak from the rain, and instead of asking for his order, she'd given him what he needed most, without a price tag attached. That night, he drove by the cafe again. This time the lights were on, and through the rain-speckled window, he saw her wiping down the counter, moving with that same gentle rhythm she always had. She didn't know the storm had passed. Not yet, but soon. She'd find the clouds a little lighter, the road ahead a little clearer. And Ethan, he'd keep sitting in the corner, drinking his tea, and letting her think the world had just shifted in her favor. If you believe in quiet acts of kindness, the kind that change lives without anyone ever knowing, stay with this story, because the truth is about to come out in a way neither of them expected. It happened on a Tuesday morning, one of those days when the rain had taken a break, leaving the streets damp and shining, like the world had been polished overnight. Clara was behind the counter, her hair tied back loosely, a streak of flour still across her cheek from the batch of muffins she'd rushed out of the oven. The cafe was quieter than usual. A few regulars sipped their drinks in the corners, and the faint sound of a spoon clinking against a cup seemed louder than normal. The bell above the door jingled, and in walked Harold. Harold was one of her favorites, a retired postman with a habit of wearing wool sweaters no matter weather. He'd been coming for years, always ordering the same thing, a plain coffee, and, if Clara had it, a slice of whatever cake was left over. She'd never taken his money for it, not once, and today was no different. When he reached for his wallet, she waved him off with her usual smile. "Don't even think about it, Harold." But instead of his usual chuckle, he just looked at her and sighed. "You know," he said, resting his hands on the counter, "you remind me of someone I once knew. Someone who used to believe small kindnesses could change the world." Clara laughed softly, shrugging it off. "Well, maybe they can." Harold's expression shifted, a mix of warmth and something more serious. "That someone," he continued, "was my grandson's mother. She used to bake the same cinnamon cake you make, always served it on rainy days." Clara still for a moment. "Your grandson's mother?" she asked. Harold nodded. "And my grandson, well, he's a good man, but he works too much, doesn't slow down for anything, never used to, anyway, until he started talking about this little cafe on the corner of Maple and Pine." Her eyes widened, just slightly. The pieces didn't click right away, but there was something in his tone, something in the way his eyes held hers, that made her heart shift in her chest. Harold leaned in a little. "Clara, he told me about you, about the tea, about how you never charged for the cake, and about how you closed early last week." Her breath caught. She hadn't told anyone outside the cafe about that. "Harold, how?" He smiled faintly. "Because my grandson is Ethan Blake. And when I told him about the kind-hearted girl who never let me pay for my coffee, he decided he wasn't going to let your kindness go unanswered." It hit her all at once. The debts paid, the strange, quiet ease she'd felt since that morning, the man who kept coming back, sitting in the corner, watching her with a look that seemed to carry more than words could say. "Ethan." Harold reached for his cup, nodding toward her. "He didn't want you to know, but I thought you should." Clara stood there, the smell of cinnamon and fresh coffee swirling around her, feeling something shift inside her. Not just gratitude, not just surprise, something warmer, something that made her realize this story wasn't about a stranger anymore. Sometimes the smallest kindness comes back to you in ways you never imagined. Stay with me, because the moment she confronts him will change everything. Clara didn't go looking for Ethan right away. She could have. She knew his schedule by now. The quiet mornings when he slipped in for coffee. The late afternoons when he'd sit in the corner with his laptop, pretending to work while his tea cooled untouched. But instead, she let the truth Harold had given her settle like sugar dissolving in warm water, slowly, sweetly, until she knew she had to say something. It happened on a Thursday evening. The cafe was bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun. Its windows streaked faintly from the rain earlier that morning. Only a few customers lingered, their murmured conversations blending with the soft hum of the radio. And then, the bell above the door chimed. And there he was, Ethan. He looked different somehow, not in the way he dressed. Still the crisp shirt, still the quiet confidence, but in the way his eyes softened when they met hers. Like he'd been waiting for this moment, even if he didn't know it. She poured his usual tea without asking, placing the cup in front of him before he could order. "Thanks," he said, his voice low, almost cautious. She didn't move away. "Harold came by," she told him gently. The reaction was subtle, just the faintest tightening of his jaw, the pause of his hand halfway to the cup. "Oh," he asked, like he already knew what was coming. "He told me," she said, "about the bills, about the cake, about you." For a moment, silence, the kind that presses against your ribs, making you aware of your own heartbeat. Then Ethan set the cup down, his eyes fixed on hers. "I didn't want you to know," he said quietly, "because I didn't want to change a thing." She frowned. Change what? The way you looked at me, he said. The way you smiled when I came in. The way you didn't see the name, the money, everything else. I didn't want to ruin that. I just wanted to help, without it being about me. Clara felt a lump in her throat. All those evenings he'd stayed a little longer than necessary. All the times he'd left without saying more than a few words. It wasn't distance. It was care. Ethan, she said softly, you didn't have to hide it. Kindness doesn't ruin anything. His lips curved. Just barely. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it makes people treat you differently. I didn't want that with you. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the cafe faded until it felt like they were the only two people in the world. Finally, she smiled, small but certain. Then let's promise, nothing changes. Ethan's gaze lingered on her, like he was memorizing the moment. And then, with a quiet nod, he said, nothing changes. But deep down, they both knew everything already had. Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones wrapped in kindness. Stay with me, because the next time they see each other, the rhythm of both their lives will never be the same again. The days that followed didn't feel like a grand turning point. There was no dramatic confession in the rain, no sudden shift in how they spoke or stood near each other. It was quieter than that, gentler. Ethan still came in for tea, still claimed his corner seat by the window, still set his phone face down on the table, as if the world outside the cafe could wait. But now there was something in the air, something unspoken, like the low hum of a song you know by heart. Clara noticed it first in the way he lingered. He didn't glance at his watch anymore, didn't half stand up before catching himself, as though he was always running late for something else. He simply stayed, and in staying, he began to notice things he'd never allowed himself to see before. The way Clara tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear when she laughed. The faint citrus scent from the tea leaves she scooped with practiced hands. The little scratch in the wood of the counter where someone long ago had carved the word hello. He also noticed how she moved, not in a hurry, but with a rhythm that matched the cafe itself. It wasn't slow because she was lazy, but because she gave every action its due weight. Pour the water, steep the leaves, warm the milk just so, serve it with care. And slowly, Ethan found himself matching that rhythm. At first, it was unintentional. He'd stir his tea a little longer, look out the window and watch the rain trace its uneven path down the glass. Let silence stretch between their words without rushing to fill it. One afternoon, he stayed so long that the sun dipped lower than he realized, casting the cafe in a warm amber light. Clara brought him another cup, not because he ordered it, but because she thought he might want it. You're learning, she teased, placing it gently before him. Learning what? He asked. To slow down, she said, her smile soft, her voice almost a whisper. It was true. He hadn't realized how much of his life had been lived in transit, from meeting to meeting, deadline to deadline, always looking toward the next thing, never fully present in the one before it. But here with her, there was nowhere else to be, no better place than this little cafe that smelled of cinnamon and rain. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel the pull to leave. They began to share these small moments more often, a conversation about nothing in particular, a laugh over a spilled drop of tea, the companionable silence of two people comfortable enough not to speak. The world outside kept moving at its frantic pace, but inside those walls, time bent to their will. And maybe, Ethan thought, this was what peace looked like. It became their quiet tradition, not something they ever spoke of or planned with words, but a rhythm they both fell into as naturally as breathing. Whenever the rain began to fall, whether it was a soft, misty drizzle or a heavy, drumming storm, Ethan found his way to the cafe. The bell above the door would chime softly as he entered, and Clara would already be looking up from behind the counter, her eyes bright, her smile the kind that could make a weary man feel seen. The cafe itself had changed in little ways since he'd invested in it. The chairs no longer wobbled. The roof no longer leaked. The old light fixtures had been polished, casting a warm, steady glow over the room. But at its heart, nothing had changed. The mismatched mugs still hung above the counter. The same jar of cinnamon sticks sat near the register, ready to garnish the tea just so, and the walls still held the faint scent of baked bread and sugar. The same scent that had greeted Ethan on that very first night. Clara would pour the tea without asking for his order. The spice blend, his mother's favorite, now felt less like a coincidence and more like a quiet thread tying his past to his present. She'd bring a slice of cinnamon cake too, setting it on the table with that same gentle care she always had. And then they would sit. Sometimes they talked about small things, like the pattern of the rain on the windows, or the way certain songs seemed made for cloudy days. Other times, they sat in an easy silence, listening to the soft clink of spoons and the low hum of the old refrigerator in the back. Ethan found himself memorizing these moments, the way the amber light touched Clara's hair, the way steam curled up from their cups, how her laughter seemed to blend with the sound of the rain. It wasn't just a cafe anymore. It was a place where the pace of the world softened, where time stopped chasing him. And though he never said it out loud, he knew this was a life he'd been searching for without realizing it. A life with room for stillness. A life with room for her. Outside, the rain kept falling, its rhythm steady, as if promising them infinite evenings like this. Ethan took another sip of tea, feeling the warmth spread through him. Clara leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting toward the window. Two people, one small cafe, and the kind of peace that didn't need grand declarations to be real. Every rainy evening, they were there, side by side. The world could wait. And so, the cafe at the corner of kindness stayed just as it was. The scent of cinnamon in the air, the gentle hum of rain outside, and two people who had found something far rarer than success or money. They didn't need grand gestures anymore. Just a quiet table by the window, two steaming cups of spiced tea, and the knowledge that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change the course of a life forever.